My roommate walked into the living room and asked, "Did you hear the doorbell ring at 3:51 a.m. last night?" I paused the TV and laughed. "No, why, did you?" But Janelle didn't laugh back. "I knew you were a selfish pig," she said, before walking out and locking her door from the inside. I honestly thought she was on her period or something. But when I walked into the kitchen, the entire room went silent. "We can't believe you," Rhea announced. Lindsay wouldn't even look at me. "Can someone please tell me what's going on?" I grabbed a chair, but Rhea pulled it away from me. "You know exactly what you did. I was asleep like a normal person. You know I hate staying up late." It blinked back the tears because it felt like our years of friendship meant nothing anymore. That's when I saw I had 16 missed calls, all from my mom. She picked up on the first ring, but before I could say anything, she started sobbing. "I thought I raised you better. You told me you promised you'd never do anything to hurt your future." "Mom, what are you talking about?" But she'd already hung up. She'd blocked me. Lindsay finally looked up and her eyes were red like she'd been crying. "Samuel saw you. The whole basketball team saw you." My eyebrows furrowed. Samuel was my boyfriend of 8 months. I went into our chat and his contact photo disappeared. He'd blocked me too. "Even your sister called me," Rhea said quietly. "She wanted to know if you were okay. If you were on drugs or having some kind of breakdown." I told her no, you're just a pick-me. I left making excuses about being late for class, not wanting them to see me cry. But when I got to campus, Dr. Rose was waiting outside the lecture hall. "The dean wants to see you. Now." Her voice was cold, professional, nothing like the professor who told me she believed in me. In the hallway, other students were pointing and whispering. When I checked my phone, I had dozens of texts from numbers I didn't recognize. "Hey, remember me from Tuesday night? You said I could crash whenever. Can I come by tonight? You promised." I switched to DND. The dean's office was packed. My academic advisor, 2 security guards, and someone from student housing. 37 complaints in 2 weeks about me endangering campus safety. Security footage showed me using my student ID to let strangers into the dining hall at 4 a.m., into the computer lab where expensive equipment had gone missing. "I don't remember any of this," I kept saying, while they insisted it was a safe space for me to tell the truth. They gave me 2 options: voluntary leave of absence for medical evaluation or formal expulsion proceedings. I chose medical leave. When I got back to the apartment, my stuff was already in trash bags in the front yard. My roommates had voted. Emergency eviction meeting while I was at the dean's office. My bank called while I was loading boxes into my car. Someone had flagged suspicious activity on my account. The lady read off the transactions. $800 ATM withdrawal at 4:27 a.m. $600 withdrawal at 3:58 a.m. All from different nights. All while I was literally asleep. I sat in my packed car in the parking lot, nowhere to go. My part-time job had already called to say I was terminated. My manager had security footage of me in the store at 3 a.m., loading merchandise into bags while talking to thin air. She said I looked possessed. That's when I lost it. I marched back into the apartment building and started pounding on our door. "Open up! I know you're in there!" Mrs. Kathy from next door looked terrified, but I didn't care anymore. After 5 minutes, Janelle opened the door with the chain still on. "You need to leave before we call the cops." "My entire life is destroyed and I don't even know why. I have a right to see what you showed everyone." Janelle tried to close the door, but I pushed harder. "Show me the footage." "You don't want to see it," she said, but her resolve was weakening. "It'll make everything worse. Worse than being homeless? Worse than losing everything?" Someone was definitely calling security. "I'll stand here all night if I have to. I'll sue every single one of you for defamation. Fine!" Janelle yanked the door and I almost fell forward. "But when this breaks you, remember you literally forced me to show you." She grabbed her laptop from the counter while Lindsay and Rhea stood in their doorways watching. There were dozens of video files organized by date going back 3 months. My hands were shaking as she clicked on one from last Tuesday. The footage was from our apartment's hallway camera. Timestamp, 3:40 a.m. I watched myself walk out of my bedroom wearing the oversized Lakers shirt I always slept in, but my eyes were wide open but empty. My hand reached for the locks, undoing each one like it was routine. Then I opened the door and stood there having a full conversation with someone in the hallway. I was nodding, gesturing, even laughing at something they said. What I watched myself do next made my blood freeze. I stepped aside and let a complete stranger walk into our apartment like he owned the place. The guy was maybe 30 with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He walked straight to our kitchen and opened the fridge while I stood there watching him with those blank eyes. Janelle clicked to show another angle from the living room camera, where the same man was sitting on our couch eating our leftover Chinese food. I was standing next to him holding my wallet open and pulling out cash to hand him. My hands started shaking harder as Janelle opened another file from 2 weeks earlier. The timestamp showed 4:15 a.m., and there I was at our front door again in my Lakers shirt. This time I was digging through the kitchen drawer where we kept spare keys and random junk. I pulled out our spare apartment key and walked back to hand it to the same guy in the hallway. He took it and patted my shoulder like we were old friends while I nodded at whatever he was saying. Janelle's fingers moved to another folder labeled with last week's date. The footage switched to the campus dining hall security camera at 4:03 a.m. I watched myself swipe my student ID over and over, letting in 5 or 6 people I'd never seen before. They were carrying empty backpacks and started loading up food from the buffet stations. One guy was stuffing whole loaves of bread into his bag, while a woman grabbed armfuls of fruit. I stood there holding the door open with that same empty look on my face. My stomach turned and I pushed past Janelle toward the bathroom. I barely made it to the toilet before throwing up everything from dinner. My whole body was shaking as I gripped the cold porcelain, trying to understand what was happening to me. Janelle knocked on the door asking if I was okay, but I couldn't answer yet. She said there were more videos, but she wouldn't show them without Rhea and Lindsay there too. I stayed on the bathroom floor for a few more minutes, trying to stop the room from spinning. When I finally came back out, Rhea and Lindsay had returned from wherever they'd been hiding. They were all sitting together on the couch looking at me like I was some kind of dangerous animal. Janelle had the laptop open again and started clicking through more files while they watched. Their faces changed from angry to confused as they saw video after video of me doing things I didn't remember. Lindsay covered her mouth with both hands when she saw me walking with that stranger through our hallway. In one video from 3 weeks ago, I was at an ATM at 3:47 a.m. withdrawing stacks of 20s. The same man stood right behind me with his hand on my shoulder like he was guiding me. Another video showed me in the campus computer lab unplugging expensive equipment and handing it to him. I told them I needed to figure out who this person was and what he'd been doing to me. Rhea said they'd already tried to identify him, but he wasn't a student at our school. She said he always kept his face turned away from cameras or wore that baseball cap pulled down low. They'd shown the videos to campus security, but nobody recognized him from the partial views they had. It was getting late, and they could see I was barely holding myself together at this point. After some whispering between them, they agreed to let me sleep on the couch, since I clearly wasn't safe alone. They brought out an old blanket and pillow from the hall closet, but kept their bedroom doors locked. I lay there staring at the ceiling all night, wondering how many times this had happened without me knowing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself in those videos moving around like a zombie. My phone kept buzzing with texts from numbers I didn't know asking when I'd be available again. Around 5 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and started making a list on my phone. I needed copies of all the security footage to show to someone who could help me. I had to get my bank records to see how much money was missing from my account. The campus health center needed to know something was wrong with me medically. When Janelle woke up around 7, she found me still on the couch surrounded by notes I'd written. I asked her to please share the video files so I could take them to the police. She was reluctant at first, but eventually agreed after I promised to keep their names out of any reports. She uploaded everything to a cloud folder and gave me the password to access it. I spent the next 3 hours going through every single video and making a timeline in a notebook. The pattern was clear once I laid it all out with dates and times. This had been happening 2 or 3 nights every week for the past 3 months. Always between 3 and 5 a.m. when everyone else was asleep. Always involving the same man who seemed to know exactly when and where to find me. My bank statements showed over $4,000 withdrawn during these nighttime episodes. The text messages from strangers all referenced promises I'd apparently made to let them crash at our place. Some mentioned specific items I'd supposedly agreed to get them from the campus store. One person said I'd promised to help them get into restricted buildings using my student access. Everything in my life suddenly made sense in the worst possible way. The next morning, I drove straight to the bank with my notebook full of dates and times. The fraud department made me wait 40 minutes before someone could see me. The representative typed everything into her computer while I showed her the withdrawals on my statement. She said they'd need to pull their ATM camera footage, which would take a few days, but she could freeze my accounts right away. I filled out 3 different forms and signed a bunch of papers saying I didn't authorize those withdrawals. Walking back to my car, I tried calling my mom again. She didn't pick up, so I left a long message explaining about the videos and how someone had been using me while I was unconscious. My voice cracked when I told her I was scared and needed her to please call me back. The campus housing office was my next stop, but they wouldn't let me back into my old room. The lady at the desk gave me a business card for campus security and said I needed to file a report about the unauthorized person. Ross Compton's office was in the basement of the administration building. He actually listened to my whole story without interrupting. He pulled up footage from different building entrances on his computer and started scrolling through timestamps. There was the same guy from the apartment videos appearing at the dining hall entrance at 3:47 a.m. Another clip showed him at the computer lab at 4:15 a.m. Ross clicked to a different angle where you could see him guiding me by the elbow when I seemed confused about which direction to go. He was clearly controlling where I went and knew exactly what he was doing. Ross burned everything onto a USB drive for me and said he'd keep investigating. I realized I needed to see a doctor right away to document whatever was happening to me medically. The campus health center couldn't fit me in, but they gave me a referral to a sleep specialist. The earliest appointment was 2 weeks away, which felt like forever. That night, I called Yasmin from my statistics class because I had nowhere else to go. She believed me when I explained everything and said I could crash at her place. We set up my phone to record me sleeping propped against her dresser. She helped me put a door alarm on the inside of her bedroom door just in case. Around 3:30 a.m., the phone recording showed me sitting up in bed with my eyes wide open. I stood up and walked toward the door, but the alarm we'd installed started beeping loud. Yasmin jumped up and grabbed my shoulders to stop me from leaving. We watched the video back and I was mumbling responses to questions nobody was asking. I kept nodding and agreeing with someone who wasn't there. Yasmin was really freaked out, but she stayed calm and helped me understand what was happening. The next day, I went to the police station with the USB drive Ross had given me. The officer at the desk looked bored until I started showing him the security footage. He called over his supervisor, who watched me being guided through campus buildings by this stranger. They took my statement and opened a case file about someone potentially drugging or manipulating me during vulnerable states. The supervisor said they'd work with campus security to identify the man, but warned me these investigations take time. I spent the rest of the day going through my phone records and found calls to a number I didn't recognize. They all happened around 3:30 a.m. and lasted between 5 and 10 minutes. When I tried calling the number, it was disconnected. My sister finally texted asking if I was okay because Mom was really upset. I told her about the medical referral and the police report. She said she'd try to talk to Mom for me but couldn't promise anything. The dean's office sent an email saying they were reviewing my case given the new evidence. They moved my status from disciplinary action to victim support services, which meant I could access counseling and emergency funds. I met with someone from the student legal clinic named Francine, who agreed to help me pro bono. She said we needed to build a comprehensive case showing I was exploited while experiencing some kind of sleep disorder. We spent 3 hours going through all the evidence and creating a timeline. She helped me understand that I wasn't crazy and this wasn't my fault. That night at Yasmin's, we set up even more recording devices. I was terrified to fall asleep, but exhaustion eventually won. The footage showed another episode around 4 a.m., where I tried to give out Yasmin's address to someone on my phone. Yasmin had hidden my phone in her closet, so I was just talking to my empty hand. We realized this person had been tracking where I stayed and following me to new locations. Ross called the next morning saying they'd identified partial license plates from a rideshare car. The car showed up multiple times on nights I'd left campus. He was working with local police to track down the driver. I finally got into the sleep clinic on a cancellation when someone else didn't show up. Dr. Mercer listened to my whole story and ordered immediate testing. She said my symptoms sounded like severe parasomnia possibly triggered by stress or medication. The overnight sleep study was scheduled for the following week, but she prescribed safety measures right away. She wrote a letter for the university explaining my medical condition and recommended supervision at night. I was starting to feel like maybe I could figure this out and get my life back. My phone rang while I was walking back to Yasmin's place and the caller ID showed my bank. The woman on the other end asked me to verify my identity 3 times before explaining they'd pulled ATM camera footage from the nights of the withdrawals. She said I was clearly visible in my Lakers shirt and slippers standing at the machine at 4:27 a.m., but my eyes looked unfocused and someone was standing directly behind me. The person had their hand on my shoulder and appeared to be telling me what buttons to push. She said their fraud investigation unit was taking over the case and would need me to come in to sign some papers. I was writing down the appointment time when my phone buzzed with a text from my sister saying mom was crying nonstop and starting to think something bad was really happening to me. She wanted to drive up this weekend to help me figure everything out, but I told her to wait until I knew more. After hanging up, I sat on Yasmin's couch going through my phone records from the past 3 months. There were dozens of calls to a number I didn't recognize, all happening around 3:30 a.m. and lasting between 5 and 10 minutes. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number, but it just gave me a message saying it was disconnected. I screenshot everything and added it to the folder of evidence I was building. An email popped up from the dean's office saying they were reviewing my case based on the new evidence Ross had provided. They were moving my status from disciplinary action to victim support services, which meant I could get counseling and emergency financial help. The next morning, I walked into the student legal clinic where Francine Rice was waiting with a stack of papers. She said she'd help me pro bono because what happened to me was clearly criminal exploitation of someone with a medical condition. We spent 2 hours going through everything, and she helped me understand my rights and what we needed to prove. She made copies of all my evidence and started drafting letters to the university and my former employer. That night at Yasmin's, we set up 3 different recording devices and put door alarms on every entrance. Yasmin even wedged a chair under her bedroom door handle in case I tried to get in there during an episode. Around 4 a.m., the motion sensor went off and the camera caught me sitting up in bed having a full conversation with nobody. I was giving someone Yasmin's full address, including the apartment number, and describing where she kept her spare key. Yasmin watched the footage with her hand over her mouth, and we both realized this person had been tracking me to every new location. She started crying and saying maybe I should stay somewhere else, but I convinced her we were safer together with all the recording equipment. The next day, Ross called to tell me they'd identified partial license plates from a rideshare car that showed up multiple times on nights I'd left campus. The same car appeared in footage from the bank, ATM cameras, and outside my old apartment building. He was working with city police to track down the driver through the rideshare company records. I was taking notes when he mentioned the car was always there about 10 minutes before I would come outside, which meant this person knew exactly when my episodes would happen. 3 days later, I got a call saying someone had canceled their sleep clinic appointment, and I could come in immediately. Dr. Mercer was a small woman with thick glasses who listened to my whole story without interrupting. She ordered blood work, a brain scan, and immediate overnight monitoring, saying my symptoms sounded like severe parasomnia, possibly triggered by stress or medication. She asked if I'd started any new medications in the past few months, and I remembered I'd switched birth control brands right before the episode started. The overnight sleep study was scheduled for the following week, but she didn't want to wait that long to start treatment. She prescribed door alarms, motion sensors, and wrote a letter to the university explaining I had a documented medical condition that caused complex sleep behaviors. She also recommended having someone supervise me every night until we figured out what was triggering the episodes. I left her office with prescriptions, safety equipment recommendations, and strict instructions to never sleep alone. Yasmin picked me up and we went straight to the pharmacy to get everything Dr. Mercer had prescribed. The pharmacist looked concerned when she saw the combination of medications and safety devices on the list. She pulled me aside to explain how the door alarms worked and made sure I understood I needed someone watching me at all times during sleep. We bought extra batteries for all the recording devices and a new lock for Yasmin's apartment that required a code to open from the inside. That night, we tested all the new equipment and I took the first dose of medication Dr. Mercer prescribed to reduce the episodes. Yasmin stayed up until 2 a.m. watching me before her roommate took over the next shift. Nothing happened that night, which felt like a small victory, even though we knew it didn't mean the problem was solved. The next morning, my phone rang while I was eating cereal, and I almost didn't answer when I saw it was my mom. She started crying the second I picked up and kept saying she was sorry over and over for not believing me. She told me she'd been looking at flights and could be there by tomorrow, but I asked her to wait until we knew more about what was happening. I could hear her writing things down while I explained about the sleep clinic appointment and the police investigation. She made me promise to call her every single day, and I agreed just to get her to stop crying. 2 hours later, Ross called to say they'd tracked down the rideshare driver who picked me up all those nights. The driver remembered me because I always got in with the same guy who said he was my cousin helping me get home safe. He described the man as tall with dark hair and a scar on his left hand, and agreed to work with their sketch artist that afternoon. The driver said the guy always paid cash and gave big tips to keep him from asking questions. He also mentioned the man would tell him exactly where to go, like he knew my schedule perfectly. While I was processing this information, my phone buzzed with a text from Samuel. He wrote that he was sorry for blocking me and hoped I was getting help. That was it. 8 months together, and all I got was 2 sentences. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding, because I was too exhausted and hurt to deal with his absence during the worst time of my life. The sleep study appointment came faster than expected when someone canceled at the last minute. I spent the whole night at the clinic with wires attached to my head and cameras recording everything. Around 2 a.m., I sat up and started having a full conversation with nobody, while the machines recorded my brain activity. The technician came in and asked me questions which I answered perfectly, even though I was completely unconscious. They tested different stimuli like lights and sounds, and I responded to all of them while still asleep. Dr. Mercer reviewed the footage the next morning and said it was one of the most severe cases of parasomnia she'd ever seen. She showed me the brain scans where certain parts of my brain were active, while others that control consciousness were completely shut down. She prescribed stronger medication and said we'd need to monitor this closely because someone had clearly been taking advantage of my condition. Ross called that afternoon to tell me they'd identified the man from the sketch. He had a long history of exploitation crimes and specifically targeted people with sleep disorders or other vulnerabilities. They'd issued a warrant but hadn't been able to locate him yet. He showed up at 3 different addresses over the past 5 years and always disappeared before police could catch him. Ross said they were checking hotels and monitoring public transportation, but the guy seemed to know how to stay hidden. I spent the next few days working with Francine from the legal clinic to petition the university for full reinstatement. We put together a thick folder with all the medical documentation from Dr. Mercer, the police reports from Ross, and security footage showing I was clearly a victim, not a perpetrator. Francine wrote a detailed letter explaining how the university had failed to recognize a medical condition and instead treated me like a criminal. She included testimonies from Dr. Mercer about parasomnia and how sufferers can be exploited. The dean's office scheduled a review meeting for the following week. Meanwhile, the bank called to confirm they'd classified all those ATM withdrawals as fraudulent activity. They started the process of returning the stolen money, but warned it could take several weeks to get everything back. The fraud investigator said I'd need to file additional paperwork and might have to testify if they caught the guy and pressed charges. I was surviving on emergency loans from student services which barely covered food and gas. My old manager called the next day after getting the medical documentation I'd sent. She said she couldn't give me my job back because they'd already hired someone else, but she agreed to change my termination from misconduct to medical leave. She apologized and said she should have realized something was wrong when she saw me on the security footage talking to nobody. She promised to write a letter of recommendation explaining the situation for future employers. That night, Yasmin helped me set up our new safety routine with door wedges that would make noise if moved, and motion sensors that connected to her phone. We created a buddy system where she'd check on me every 2 hours during the night, and I'd wear a GPS tracker in case I somehow got out. The episodes were happening less often with the new medication Dr. Mercer prescribed, but we couldn't take any chances. We practiced what to do if I had an episode, including how to gently guide me back to bed without waking me up. We tested all the alarms and made sure the cameras covered every angle of the room. I started keeping a detailed log of my sleep patterns and any episodes that occurred. After 2 weeks on the new medication, I was only having minor episodes maybe once every 3 nights, instead of the complex behaviors from before. Then 3 weeks into treatment, something amazing happened. I went to bed at 10 p.m. and woke up at 7 a.m. in the exact same position without any episodes recorded on the cameras. Yasmin had stayed up checking the monitors all night and confirmed I hadn't moved or talked once. We were so excited we went to celebrate with breakfast at the campus diner, where I ate pancakes for the first time in months without worrying about what I might have done the night before. 2 days later, Ross called while I was in the library studying for a makeup exam. He told me they'd caught the guy at the bus station with a one-way ticket to Phoenix. The arrest happened that morning after someone recognized him from the sketch they'd been circulating to transportation hubs. When they searched his backpack, they found 3 different driver's licenses with different names but the same photo. They also found a notebook with addresses and details about other people, including notes about their sleep schedules and medical conditions. Ross said the detective wanted me to come to the station tomorrow morning for a lineup, and I felt my hands start shaking so bad I dropped my phone. I called Francine right away, and she cleared her schedule to come with me, saying I shouldn't have to do this alone. That night, I barely slept thinking about seeing him again, even though I knew he'd be behind glass and couldn't hurt me. The next morning, Francine met me at the police station and held my arm as we walked inside, where a detective explained how the lineup would work. There were 6 men standing in a row, and I knew him instantly, even though he'd changed his hair and was wearing different clothes. Number 4 was the one who'd been coming into my apartment while I was unconscious and stealing from me. My voice shook when I said the number, but the detective nodded and wrote it down, saying I'd done great, and this would help the case. Francine stayed with me while I signed the paperwork and answered more questions about the nights I remembered waking up confused. Walking out of the station, I felt lighter somehow, like seeing him in custody meant I could finally stop looking over my shoulder all the time. 3 days later, I got an email from the dean's office asking me to come in for a meeting about my academic status. The whole review board was there, including Dr. Rose, who wouldn't make eye contact at first. They explained that given the evidence of criminal exploitation and my documented medical condition, they were fully clearing my disciplinary record. The dean personally apologized for how the situation was handled and offered resources including free counseling and extensions on all my coursework. Dr. Rose waited until everyone else left, then came over with tears in her eyes saying she was so sorry for not believing me. She offered to meet with me weekly to help me catch up in her class, and said she'd already talked to my other professors about accommodations. That same afternoon, my sister texted saying Janelle had reached out to her on Instagram asking if I was okay. Apparently, all 3 of my old roommates felt terrible about the eviction after seeing the news about the arrest. My sister said they wanted to know if I'd be willing to talk, but understood if I wasn't ready for that yet. They'd already contacted housing to drop the complaint against me, and told them it was all a misunderstanding caused by not knowing about my medical condition. I wasn't ready to be friends again, and maybe never would be, but it helped knowing they finally understood what really happened. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor called to tell me the man had agreed to plead guilty to avoid trial. The charges included theft, trespassing, exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and something called criminal impersonation for using fake IDs. He was looking at 5 years in prison, and would have to register as a predator because of the exploitation charge. The prosecutor said my identification and all the evidence Ross collected made the case so strong he had no choice but to take the deal. I wouldn't have to testify, which was a huge relief because I didn't want to see him again or relive everything in court. The University Counseling Center set me up with a therapist who specialized in trauma, and we started meeting twice a week. She helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault, even though part of me kept thinking I should have noticed something was wrong sooner. We worked through the anger I felt at everyone who didn't believe me, and treated me like a criminal when I was actually a victim. The therapist gave me exercises to do when I felt anxious about sleeping, and techniques for dealing with the flashbacks I sometimes had. My mom called one day saying she'd taken time off work and wanted to come stay with me for a week if I'd let her. She arrived with 2 suitcases and immediately started crying when she saw how thin I'd gotten from all the stress. We spent the first few days just talking and rebuilding trust after everything that happened between us. She went with me to look at apartments since Yasmin's couch couldn't be a permanent solution, even though Yasmin kept saying I could stay as long as I needed. We found a place on the 3rd floor of a building with a doorman and security cameras everywhere, which made me feel safer. Mom stayed the whole week helping me move in and set up extra locks and alarms that would alert my phone if anyone tried to enter. The bank finally called saying they'd finished their investigation and were returning most of the stolen money to my account. Some of the ATM fees couldn't be recovered, but it was enough to pay back the emergency loans from student services and have some left over. The whole process had taken almost 2 months, but at least I wasn't completely broke anymore and could afford groceries without counting every penny. My appointments with Dr. Mercer continued every 2 weeks, and she adjusted my medication until we found the right combination. The episodes went from happening every other night to maybe once a month, and when they did happen, they were mild and manageable. She said I was responding really well to treatment and might eventually be able to reduce the medication if the improvement continued. One morning, I woke up to a text from Samuel saying he'd heard about everything and wanted to talk if I was willing. I stared at his message for a long time, thinking about how he'd blocked me when I needed him most. I typed back that I was doing well and appreciated him reaching out but didn't want to reconnect right now, or maybe ever. His validation didn't matter anymore because I'd learned to trust myself even when nobody else would believe me. My sister showed up at Yasmin's apartment 3 days later with a box of donuts and an apology that made us both cry. She started driving up every other weekend after that, and we'd spend Saturday mornings walking around campus while I told her everything that happened since the arrest. She admitted she should have believed me from the start, instead of assuming I was having some kind of breakdown. The university finally cleared me to return to classes with special accommodations that Dr. Mercer helped arrange. I could record all my lectures on my phone, and had flexible deadlines for assignments in case I had bad nights with the parasomnia. My professors were mostly understanding though, some still looked at me weird like they thought I might do something crazy in class. I focused on catching up on the coursework I'd missed during the investigation, and my grades slowly started recovering. Within a month, I was back on track for graduation, though it took way more work than before since I had to basically relearn everything from scratch. Yasmin stuck by me through all of it and became my closest friend after everyone else disappeared. We'd joke about her being my nighttime bodyguard since she still let me crash at her place when I felt unsafe sleeping alone. She'd set up all these alarms and even put bells on her door so we'd know if I tried to leave during an episode. Her support saved me when literally everyone else turned their backs and assumed the worst about me. 6 weeks after they arrested that guy, the prosecutor called saying I needed to testify at his sentencing hearing. I sat in that courtroom for 3 hours telling the judge exactly how this destroyed my entire life. I explained about losing my apartment and my job and my boyfriend and how my own mother blocked me. The judge listened to everything and said she understood the severe impact this had on me. She kept the full 5-year sentence the prosecutor recommended and made him register as a predator. After the hearing, I started going to a support group for people with parasomnia that met every Tuesday at the community center. The first time I shared my story about being exploited while unconscious, several people started crying. They said it helped them feel less alone and more empowered to get help before something similar happened to them. One woman had been having episodes for years, but was too scared to tell anyone because she thought people would think she was crazy. The university announced new protocols for students with medical conditions that affect behavior after what happened to me. They started training security guards and residential staff about parasomnia and other sleep disorders so they'd recognize the signs instead of just assuming someone was on drugs or drunk. Ross from campus security actually called to apologize for not catching it sooner and said my case changed how they handle these situations. Dr. Rose sent me an email in April saying she'd recommended me for a summer internship at a research lab downtown. She wrote this long letter about my resilience and determination that made me cry when I read it. The lab director called the next week to offer me the position and didn't even mention everything that happened, which felt like a fresh start. 2 weeks before graduation, Janelle texted asking if we could meet for coffee to clear the air. Rhea and Lindsay came too, and we sat at the campus Starbucks for 2 hours talking about everything. They apologized for not considering medical causes and just assuming I was being selfish or reckless. We'd never be close friends again, but at least we found some closure and could be civil when we saw each other around campus. They said they felt terrible about the eviction and wished they'd handled things differently. My mom flew in the week after graduation to help me move into my new apartment that had way better security than my old place. We found a 3rd-floor unit in a building with a doorman and cameras everywhere, which made both of us feel safer. She helped me install extra locks on the doors and set up motion sensors that would alert my phone if someone tried to come in while I was sleeping. We spent the whole week unpacking boxes and talking about everything that happened between us. She kept saying how proud she was of how I handled everything and advocated for myself when nobody would listen. She admitted she should have trusted me instead of immediately assuming the worst and blocking me. Graduation day came faster than expected, and I walked across that stage with my whole family cheering from the audience. My sister drove up with her husband, and my mom was taking pictures with her phone the entire time. Even my dad flew in from Seattle, which surprised me since we hadn't talked much during everything. When they called my name, I could hear Yasmin screaming from the crowd, which made me laugh. The whole experience taught me to trust my instincts and fight for myself even when everyone doubts me. I learned that sometimes the people closest to you will let you down, but there are also people like Yasmin who will stand by you no matter what. The parasomnia still happens sometimes, but it's manageable now with the medication and safety measures. I know what triggers it and how to protect myself from anyone who might try to take advantage. 3 months after walking across that stage, I started my internship at the research lab downtown and settled into a routine that felt almost normal. My mornings began with checking the motion sensor logs from the night before, taking my medication with breakfast, and driving to work where I spent 8 hours analyzing data and running experiments. The episodes only happened maybe once a month now, and they were mild. Just me sitting up in bed mumbling before lying back down. Nothing like the complex behaviors from before. One afternoon, the mail carrier handed me a thick envelope with no return address, and inside was a handwritten letter from someone named Sarah who lived 2 states away. She wrote that she'd been following my case in the news and wanted to thank me because my testimony helped convict the same man who'd done similar things to her sister 3 years ago when she had seizures at night. Reading her words about how her sister never got justice until my case brought everything to light made me sit down on my apartment steps and cry for 20 minutes. Sarah's sister had dropped out of college and never recovered, but knowing that man was finally in prison gave their family some peace. That weekend, Yasmin came over with boxes and measuring tape to plan our move to the new city, where she'd gotten a job at a marketing firm. She kept joking that I owed her 3 months of back rent for all those nights sleeping on her couch, and calculated it at $2,000 with interest. We found a 2-bedroom place with security cameras in every hallway, and a doorman who worked nights, which made both of us feel safer about living together again. My mom called every Sunday morning at exactly 9 to check in, but she'd stopped asking about every little detail of my sleep and trusted me to manage things myself. She'd send care packages with my medication refills, and homemade cookies, and little notes saying she was proud of how strong I'd become. Dad started calling too, usually when Mom wasn't around, and we'd talk about work stuff and carefully avoid mentioning everything that happened. My sister drove up once a month for lunch, and we'd built this new relationship where we actually talked about real things instead of just surface stuff. The victim advocacy group met every Saturday morning in the basement of a community center, and I started going after seeing their flyer at my therapist's office. Most weeks I just listened to other people's stories, but sometimes I'd help someone fill out paperwork or explain how to get security footage from businesses. There was this older woman whose husband had early dementia and people were taking advantage of him during his confused episodes, and I helped her understand the legal process. One morning I got a notification that the man who hurt me was trying to appeal his sentence, claiming the evidence was circumstantial. The prosecutor called to ask if I wanted to attend the hearing, but I deleted the voicemail without calling back because I'd already given everything I had to that case. 2 days later I got another call saying the appeal was denied and his 5-year sentence would stand. The relief lasted about 10 seconds before I realized I didn't actually care anymore because I'd moved so far past needing his punishment to feel okay. Dr. Mercer called that same week asking if I'd speak to her medical students about recognizing parasomnia exploitation. She said my case had become part of their curriculum, and hearing from an actual patient would help them understand the human side of what they were studying. I agreed to do it even though public speaking made me nervous because maybe one of those students would recognize the signs in their own patients someday. The lecture hall was packed with second-year medical students all taking notes on their laptops, while I explained what it felt like to lose months of my life to something I couldn't control. They asked smart questions about the medication and safety protocols, and one student stayed after to tell me her brother had similar episodes, and she was getting him help. A full year after everything fell apart, I sat at my desk in the lab writing up research findings for publication, and realized I hadn't thought about checking my motion sensors in weeks. My episodes were down to maybe once every few months, and so mild that sometimes I only knew they happened because of the timestamp on my sleep tracking app. Yasmin and I had turned our apartment into this comfortable space with extra locks that we never used anymore, and a security system we'd basically forgotten about. My family came for dinner once a month, and we'd cook together and laugh about normal things without anyone watching me for signs of problems. The support group had become less about my own healing, and more about helping new members navigate their first weeks of dealing with crimes that happened during vulnerable states. Work offered me a permanent position after my internship ended, with good benefits and a flexible schedule that let me keep my medical appointments. Everything that happened was still part of my story, but it didn't define my days anymore. just shaped how I understood that sometimes the worst things teach you exactly how strong you can become. Thanks for exploring all these questions with me today. It's been a pretty curious little journey to share together. Until next time, take care. Subscribe for more content like this.